Hey everybody, it's Romania Black. Yeah, I couldn't wait. I could not wait. Not after episode 14. No. That episode was so strange. And I feel bad about episode 14. I honestly do. It's the only reaction and discussion I kind of regret out of this series so far. Not the reaction side of it, because I was like, WTF. But the discussion side, I feel like there's just something missing, and that maybe I'm missing something. And I don't want to be spoiled, so if it's going to have context later on in the season, I don't want to know yet. I want to be surprised when I find out and be like, oh, that connects to this and this, right? But I'm going to be curious to see the comments for episode 14 to see if there's anything that stands out that I can be like, okay. And so I'm going to be curious as to that. So I'm recording this with comments from episodes 12 and 13. So episode 14 has not come out on Patreon yet. So I'm going to be interested to see what all you say about that episode, because it feels like a weird episode. It feels like a midway kind of like segmenting into something that's going to happen later on in the season. And I have a feeling that by the time I get to the end of the season, I will tie back to that episode and be like, oh, okay, here's where we're going with this. So that's interesting to know, but I just, the conversation with Annie, I feel like I'm missing something and it's going to nag at me, and I want it to nag at me. I want it to like fester in my brain, and then when I watch something in these future episodes that like spark it, I'll be like, oh yeah, so please don't spoil me, no hints or clues, but I'm going to be curious to see what people said about episode 14. That's going to be interesting. But I do have some comments before we start. But just my own personal comment, Annie relating to the Vikings and the idea of love. Because love, I'm going to kind of bookend this comment section in the intro off with the concept of love. Because for Anne, she's talking about like this treasure that she has, this ring that she has, and that she loves it. She ties value to it. It's something tangible that is near to her. And that's something that kind of relates to the Vikings, and them being like, well, this here is immediate. The idea of God and his heaven is something far away and distant and is abstract, and it's not something that they can readily love. Whereas if you're Christian, it's something that has a whole different context. So I thought that was interesting, Anne relating to the Vikings in that moment, despite her village being annihilated by those Vikings. So it's funny to see those comparisons, right? Shimoyama, I asked in the episode who Asur's VA was. I was like, can somebody tell me? And Shimoyama, you came through with flying colors, saying that Asur's VA is the same as Keith from Attack on Titan, old Keith Shadis, Suguyo Mogami. I was like, oh, that's where I've heard that voice from. It's Keith, my dear sweet Keith Shadis. I will simp for Shadis for days. So thank you, Shimoyama. That's great to know. Wushin Suibian also noted that young Askeladd's VA is the same VA as Longa from Skate the Infinity, and I was like, oh, perfect. I like that young Askeladd gets the same VA as Skate. It's a fun time. Anita Meyer commented on how Thorfinn is connected to Askeladd's oh, yeah. So I want to talk about this. I'm looking at my notes. I'm like, what did I write down? So back in episode 4, Anita Meyer pointed out that Thorfinn made the comment about Askeladd's armor, saying it looked weird. And I was like, oh! So that was kind of like a cool little foreshadowing moment back in episode 4 to preface for episode 13 when we find out Askeladd's like heritage. It was like, that's really cool. I like it because it's such a throwaway line, like Anita talked about in the comments, saying it's just a little comment, a little throwaway line, doesn't mean anything. And then when you actually think about it, you're like, no, it was intentional. So I was like, I love moments like that. So thank you for pointing that out. Evil Communist Pickle Rick, which is still one of the best names handles on here, gave me a little bit of Old English. I was like, I took an Old English class back in college, but I hated it, so I've forgotten a lot of it. But Morganwoog is the name of the one town, and then Brakaniog, and then the CH sound they noted makes like a sound that doesn't really translate to English. Language is so hard, especially translating, because there's some languages that have sounds that you're like, my mouth won't make that sound. So for example, I cannot roll my R's to save my life. Can't do it. I try it, doesn't work out. I sound like I'm choking on a piece of ice. And so anytime something requires an R roll, I'm like, how do y'all train yourselves to do this? But I like that. So thank you for that. But also in the manga, that line, the more you fall for someone, the more things won't go your way. Evil Communist Pickle Rick noted that the manga translates that line a little bit differently, and that in the translation, the manga says, the more fascinating a man, the more unpredictable his actions. I love that. I love that translation more because that translation of that line in the episode has always struck me as kind of weird. I'm like, it's cool, but it sounds kind of like falling in love with someone and then not going your way. It sounds very BL. This sounds more in line with Vinland Saga. I'm like, no, the more fascinating they are, the more unpredictable they are, which is perfect for Askeladd. It ties perfectly to him and his unpredictable actions. So, and could tie to Thorkell too, and maybe Canute. Interesting. I mean, Thorfinn's not fascinating. Thorfinn's just Thorfinn. But Canute is fascinating, and so is Thorkell and Askeladd, so maybe they're going to be unpredictable. I don't know. Bjorn's kind of fascinating, so where do we go with that? But I'm curious. Very curious. So then Al-Sora talked about how Canute wanting the falcon or the hawk back in episode 12, saying that Canute's helmet has a hawk on it. And also it is tied, the hawk is a representation of strength and courage for warriors, but it also is a symbol in Christianity for a message from God. And I was like, which seems to fit in line with Canute quite well. So I was like, that's interesting. So thank you, Al-Sora. And then finally, Ridesante talked about how the conversation of love, we're going to bookend this with a conversation of love and such, and just the idea that love has a lot of variations. And the example that Ridesante used was like eros and agape, which are terms that in English both mean love, but they are quite different. One is like unconditional love that like agape, you could tie to this unconditional love that maybe is more in line with like Christian values. And then you have eros, which is more like sexual love, which might tie more to like the Vikings, like Anne coveting the ring. It's something that's more like lusty and has more spontaneity. It's not everlasting like agape is. And so, but they're both love, right? They're both forms of love. So love can be varied and have multiple definitions. So what do we do with that? And I think this last episode is taking what the priest has been saying about love. We talked about brotherly love in the last episode. We talked about the priest's love. We've talked about like the love between a father and son in previous episodes. Like all these variations of love we've seen in the show. Are any of them wrong, or are they all right? So it's like, or what do we do with that? How does it complicate things? So I thought that was interesting, and I like that concept kind of tying back to that episode. Again, I feel like episode 14 is going to come into play with the rest of the series, and I'm going to reference back to it a lot, and I'm excited about that, but I don't want spoilers to know when or how I will do that. So that's going to be fun. But yeah, I could not wait. I had the afternoon off, and I was like, I really want to watch Vinland Saga, so here we are. I wanted to watch it. I was like, I got the afternoon off. Why not watch? I'm sure nothing will happen. I'm sure it'll be fine. But yeah, we're on episode 15 of Vinland Saga, and we'll just see what happens, right? We're gonna start that here in 3, 2, 1, and let's go. I am not making the same mistake of not bringing out Whiteboard Coon this time. Last episode, I didn't bring Whiteboard Coon out, and about 3/4 of the way through the discussion, I was like, maybe I should have. No, it has to come out for this episode because, R.I.P. Ragnar. As soon as they started taking him away, I was like, as soon as I realized he was by himself, I was like, oh, they're gonna kill him. I was like, he's by himself. Canute's not with him. He's dead. Oh my God. There's a lot that happened in this episode. A lot of things being set up behind the scenes, and it's kind of hard to tell where to start at because there's lots of things going on. There's plot related things that we get explored at in this episode, but there's also this concept of faith and being tested and about trajectory and about, non-linear paths that things go on. I'm a big fan of like non-linear history. I did a class in grad school where we talk about non-linear history. And what that means is that a lot of people view history as point A goes to point B, goes to point C, but it's not really like that. History is not, it's not like point one. I mean, yes, there's a chronological order to it, but things happen that have trajectories you don't anticipate and you can't fully understand until they happen. And so it's a concept I'm really all about because it kind of gives you a more like 3D approach to history where, for example, one thing that we talked about in that class was the plague. and how you think, okay, point A to point B, the plague, this is what caused it, this is the effects. But it's more to it than that. There's like all these different factors and influences that have been going on for decades prior to the plague starting that all led up to it beginning. And so this episode kind of does like a nonlinear history thing where things lead to things lead to things. And the trajectories, it kind of spider webs out, and it's very interesting, and it forms this crazy like network of things that are happening. And at the root of it is, as the one Viking says, Askeladd's not lucky anymore. But there's more to it than that. So I guess that's where we need to start at. We're gonna have we're gonna put the plot stuff over here, and then we'll put the spider web of magic right here as it goes. So let's just go ahead and do like the plot points to note. We're gonna put that over here. Plot points to note, because there are some things. There are things with characters that we need to note over here that will seemingly impact the story. So we've got that going on. But I would say that let's just start at the center of this and just address, as the Vikings say, the elephant in the room, that is Askeladd. Askeladd is no longer good luck. And that's something interesting, because in the past, the Vikings, now that I think about it, the Vikings have constantly said that Askeladd's lucky. He's a good leader. His luck's on his side. Everything's going to work out fine because he's got, everything goes his way, seemingly. And he's kind of relied upon that along with his talent and his leadership. But little things are starting to like upset the balance that are all adding up. Little factors are starting to domino and snowball, ironically, since we're in the middle of the mountains in the snow, that are starting to turn things against Askeladd and against his favor. Now, whether or not that ends up, domino effect that ends up like all crashing down and crescendoing at the end of the season, I don't know. Or if Askeladd's going to somehow find a way to turn it around, I don't know. But yeah, so let's just go through this episode, because this episode's pretty good. I like this episode a lot after Yule. So we start with the king and one of his mistresses, one of his slaves, his mistress is there, who's very pretty. And she's like soaking the meat in what maybe is like, it's either wine or a sauce. I'm assuming maybe the meat is so tough that she's just getting it to where he can eat it. Because, these people didn't have dental back then, so if he's weak and his, teeth or stuff are falling out or something, maybe he needs it, the meat moist enough he can eat it, and so maybe she's just soaking it up so he can chew it and digest it easier and doesn't have to chew on it. So he asks, is Canute dead? And Floki's like, no, as I've said the last 3 episodes, he's just been missing, to be precise. So yeah, so let's bring this up. Let's talk about this. So, points to note. The king, we're going to talk about the king here. The king is asking about Canute. And as Floki is giving the update, the thing is that Canute is just missing. He's just missing, right? He doesn't say, he's not died in battle that we know of. He's not been located anywhere. He's just not anywhere. He's like, Ragnar's unit tried to rescue Canute. It all backfired in Marlborough. So now it's like we're kind of left in this situation. We don't know what to do. Things are kind of sketchy. And so that is where the king is like, aren't they still surrounded by Thorkell's men? And he's like, well, yeah, they are, but we haven't seen anybody among them that looks like it could be the prince for the last 2 days. So we don't know where he is. And it seems unlikely that Thorkell would kill him, right? He may still be alive and is waiting for help. So the king says this. The king says he may still be alive and is waiting for help. The king notes that. He's like, however, even if we were to send help, we'd have to wait until spring. He's like, we can't send help even if they need it because it's not spring yet. It's too cold. It's not going to work out. He's like, I'm sure you must be very worried, Your Highness. And he just mulls the wine around and says, if Canute had been as talented as his brother Harold, then he may not have ended up missing. So that leads me to believe that he would have fought his way out and made it back there. But again, there's two ways you can look at it. We don't see his face during this to know what he's thinking, to get his facial expressions. He could be meaning that if he had been as talented as Harold, he would not have been captured or went missing. He would have found his way back to Gainsborough already. Or it could mean that, if he'd been talented as his brother, he might have ended up being dead. So he could have just decided he'd face Thorkell and ended up dying. So what's curious about all of this is that Ragnar thinks that the king wants Canute dead, that he brought Canute onto the battlefield to kill him so that Harold could take the throne. But I'm not entirely convinced of that. Now, I could be wrong, and yes, the king does want Canute dead. But I'm going to bring Ragnar over here. I'm going to actually put him right here. That Ragnar thinks the king wants Canute dead. That he wants Canute dead. We're going to spider that out here. But I don't know if that's true or not, because the king so far, if the king really wanted Canute dead and thought that it was very likely he was dead, he would have already been working to put Harold on the throne. But that's not what's happening. That's not what's happening. He brought Canute out there saying that he wanted his son to prove himself on the battlefield. Now, he could have been lying and wanted him dead. It's weird that he's telling Floki not to assume that he's dead yet, because if he really wanted Harold to be put on the throne, you'd think that he would have jumped at the opportunity to say, oh yeah, my son died out there, whatever. But the king could also be a very cautious man that is like, I'm not going to take any chances until we know for certain that Canute is dead. I'm not going to put Harold on the throne, because what if he shows up and then what do we do there? So interesting. But it's curious to know. Ragnar thinks that the king does not like Canute. I don't quite agree with that. We'll get to that later. We'll get to that later. But I don't think the king I don't think the king hates Canute. I don't. I think the king likes Canute. He loves his son, and we'll tie back to that. So anyway, but the king is interesting because we see him here. He's got the different parts where he's been cut all over his arms and he survived, and there are all the scars on his arms, and his skin is like sagged from where he's aged. Interesting. So yeah, we're gonna skip the old intro here and go back to after Yule. Oh, Thorkell. Oh, sweet Thorkell, my dude. His voice acting. Akio Otsuka, who voices Thorkell, he's wonderful. Like, just making his voice so whiny. Like, it's winter, we can't fight anymore, I hate it. Like, it's hilarious. I love it. Also, look, I know that Vinland Saga is not a BL. I know that there's like virtually no romance in this series, but if you don't want me to assume and make my own assumptions about this, then quit having Thorfinn and Canute go on dinner dates, and quit having Askeladd look forlorningly at Thorkell with his hand like, oh, is it bothering you? Like, quit doing that, because that's all I could think. I was like, is him and Thorkell a thing? Are they a ship? He's like just sitting there being like, oh, you didn't escape, you handed him over. I'm like, stop. Like, you uke to Thorkell Sime or vice versa. Yeah, you know, Thorkell's just a big, tall giant of a man, and Askeladd is his right-hand man, right? So I like that we established in this that Thorkell is not dumb. He's not dumb, and he has some kind of military prowess to him. He says, Thorkell tells Askeladd that he could use Canute. He could use Canute, which, you know, everybody wants to use Canute, right? Except for Thorfinn. But he's like, we could use Canute. He's like, we could have never-ending war. Thorkell knows his place in the system. He knows his place amongst the Vikings. He's like, we could have put him on a pedestal and started a new dynasty. He could have been a mouthpiece, a way to garner soldiers to an army. That's the thing, yeah. He's like, we could have just used him to get soldiers to come to us to serve him, but then we would be pulling the strings behind the scene. It's just a way for us to use Canute to usher in a new dynasty where we just fight endless battles. And the Vikings that want to keep fighting, we just keep doing that. That's the thing that's kind of scary about all of this, is that Thorkell knows his place in this society. He knows where he stands, and he, like Bjorn and them have kind of lamented about in the past episodes, he knows that once England falls to the Danes, he's like, well, what do we do then? He's like, what am I going to do? Am I just going to go get an office job? No. So he's like, I just want to keep fighting. And if he had Canute in his possession, he could make that work for him, because he thinks Canute's weak and thinks he's a coward. He's like, if you're the only one who's going to carry him, you'd be pretty powerful. He's like, I would be. He's like, I could make some important decisions. I like that he calls the English girl. I wonder if, we don't know. That's the thing. They're speaking in Japanese, so we don't know for sure. But I'm wondering if Thorkell knows English enough that he can speak to her. Because he tells her, he's like, beer, bring a keg. And she's like, yes. And he's like, they ordered another keg. And then this guy's like, another one? This guy's like, they're drinking and eating us at a house and home. I love that they think that they've gotten off the hook, and at the end they haven't. It's great. We'll tie back to it. They're eating through the entire city. Mm-hmm. He's like, stop crying. So yeah, so Thorkell, he's like, if I was going to lose the prince, I would have given him to the English anyway. Which is funny, because Thorkell, again, establishing that Thorkell's loyalties are just to what benefits himself. It's like, he's like, I have no loyalty towards King Sweyn, even though I'm Danish. I really just want to keep fighting, and if I gave him over to the English, Canute, then we'd probably still be in battle again. So that's what I would have done. It's curious how Thorkell is not tied to any particular country or nation. He's just out for himself. But yeah, look at Askeladd. He's like, ha ha ha, like laughing at Thorkell with his head in his hand. I'm like, are you smitten, sir? I don't mean to inject BL into every series I watch, but we haven't had a lot of romance in this series, so I'm going to take what I can get. Yeah, as soon as the fire starts to die down, you go looking for another spark. Yeah, Thorkell is not content. He can't just sit still. He's like, we're warriors. A warrior is a warrior when he's on the battlefield. He's like, what am I supposed to be when I'm not? And I love that Askeladd's like, but you know, I heard some bad news about that. Like, he's just sitting there being like, I hate to be the bearer of bad news, Thorkell, my love. And it's like, what? And then he says that they're going to recognize King Sweyn as the Bretwalda at the next the next ceremony in Wessex. And he's like, what? He's like, that's surrender. And he's like, yeah, Denmark's going to swallow England whole. The nobility want to end the war, even if it means surrendering the throne. So here's the thing that will tie to that, that they're going to, that there's already plans, that there are already plans to let Denmark overtake England. And the reason being that the nobles are tired of war. So here's the thing. The nobles are tired of the war. So they're like, we really at this point, and that kind of just shows you like the politics of the time. The nobles don't care who's in charge as long as there's not war that's threatening their land or their funds. That's kind of what it boils down to. They're like, we don't care. He's like, we're still going to get funds and resources from whoever's in charge. We're just tired of losing it all to a stupid war. So just let them surrender. It's fine. It's fine. You know, I'm like, what if the Danes decide that they don't want you all to be the wealthy anymore, or the nobles? But yeah, they're just willing for it to end. And Thorkell's like, every time I get a bad feeling about something, why does it always come true? He's like, what are you going to do? Attack King Sweyn, even if it means certain death? And then Thorkell says, I love fighting, but I hate losing. So Thorkell announces that he does not fight losing battles. I feel like that's going to be important to note in the future, that Thorkell loves fighting, but he'll only fight if he knows that there's a good chance he can win. Here, he's like, I can't face King Sweyn and his armies on my own. Our 500 men of Vikings are not going to be enough against thousands of Vikings who have just as much fervor as we do. We have an advantage over the English because they are weak, and they don't have the fighting fervor that we do, but the other Danes do. So he's like, I'm not going to do that. He's like, that's suicide. I'm not going to fight a battle I can't win. So, which is interesting. He's like, when I fight to win. And again, the one guy's sitting there like, is that so? I'm like, quit making me think things. Show. And then he says, this is no fun. I wish the world would be at war forever. Careful what you wish for. You just might get it. And so then the messenger comes. And it's like a harbinger. He's like a harbinger of destruction, where he shows up, the messenger arrives. And we touch base on the rabbit that Thorfinn kills. That's a nice little transition. We have the rabbit that Thorfinn kills just there for a second. And then we have the ears. Anything out of the ordinary? There sure is. It's damn cold. I do like that they established the science of this, that the snow absorbs sound, which is so true. And so he's like, I can't hear very well because there's too much snow. And they're in the north part of Earldom of Mercia, Askeladd's army-controlled farm village. And he's like, I can't do anything. I can't hear that far anymore. And he's like, well, it's better we keep guards all over the place. We can avoid giving away our position. And he hands him... I like that he hands him the wine, and the ear's like, yeah, do something about those guys. Like, thanks for the wine. But he can hear from there, he's like, they're obviously not farmers. And he's like, monks, keep an eye on them too. Father, forgive us. And he's like, forgive us, do you hear that? And he's like, must they constantly beg for forgiveness? Well, when you kill an entire village... I'd say that's warrant to maybe ask a while. What a pain. So what's curious here, the ear can hear them from far away in the tree, but Askeladd is conveniently like, Askeladd's like that kid that's dating, Askeladd's dating Canute, and he's got drugged to church service by Daddy Ragnar and old the priest, yeah. So he's got drugged to church service. So that's funny. He's like the boyfriend that was drugged to church against his will. And he's listening to everything. It's great. And so they're sitting there praying to gather the souls of the villagers who lie here and rest at your side. And save the souls of the men who killed these people. And forgive us of our sins. And Thorfinn's just sitting there like, Thorfinn's sitting there with the knife against the image of the three of them, being like, this isn't time to be praying for somebody else, you bastards. He's like, why are you praying for them? They're dead. You should pray for yourselves. And then the priest, who looks like he got beat to a pulp in the last episode because he shouted that they were coming. And so he says, Father, can you hear my voice? And they're both like, this is not part of our standard prayers. This is not part of our ADM service. What is this? So the priest, we'll put him up here. The priest, he has regrets and doubts his faith. Okay. Which is an interesting moment because Canute and Ragnar are like, so the priest is saying that he asked his father, it's kind of like Anne in the last episode. He said, you created us in your image, but you didn't give us your power. I love that line where he's like, you created us in your image, but you didn't give us your power. And it's like, well, if you've watched Death Note, you'd see why that would be a problem. Joking. But he's like, you made us like yourself, but you didn't give us the same power. It's like, if you love both good and bad men equally, then why do you test us despite our powerlessness? And so there's an interesting thing here. So he brings up this idea that people are molded in his image, but without his power. And he also notes the idea that if we are equal, then why are we tested despite our powerlessness? And I mean, you could argue it a lot of different ways. You could say, well, if you're equal, then both good and bad men are equal, and they're both tested and they're both powerless. So you could argue that, but that's not the reason I bring it up. Is that he's obviously lamenting like Anne was. He's like, why are these bad things happening? Like Anne's whole thing was like, my family were good, they prayed to you and everything, and they died, and I was spared. So she's like, why did these bad things happen? And to people that were supposedly good. And the priest is kind of saying the same thing. He's like, we've been doing good and praying to you. Why are we suffering? Why do you test us? And so then he says, can you hear my voice? Saying like, are you actually listening to me? And he keeps saying, our Father. He's like, I doubt your love. And Canute gets mad at that. Canute's like, no, that's enough. And Ragnar's like, oh, shit. And Thorfinn's like, raise your voice. And Canute says, did you say that you doubt the Father? Ragnar's like, oh my God. And the priest doesn't say, and he says, and you call yourself a Christian, you should fear the Lord. So yeah, so in that moment he doubts. He's like, if there really is a God, then why are these bad things happening to us despite everything? Why are the evil in the world allowed to persevere? He's like, why are we being tested? And Canute says, you should fear the Lord. But more importantly, that fathers love their children. Then he says that all fathers love their children. And Ragnar's just sitting there stunned in all of this. He's like, we must not doubt the Father's love. And Thorfinn at that point is like, oh, okay. Like Thorfinn kind of gets a little bit intrigued by this. Where Canute's like, every father loves his own child. Okay. So that's interesting because you could look at it in a number of different ways. You could look at it in that is like a defense mechanism for Canute. You could look at it saying like, okay, Canute does not want to think of the possibility that his father hates him, that the king hates him, because we see the scene where he makes him the food later on and his father shoves it away. And so a young Canute might think, oh, well, my father hates me. But Canute's saying here, he's like, no, every father loves their child. He's like, even though my dad was cruel to me, even though I grew up under cruel circumstances, my father still loves me. It's okay. So you could look at it that way. You could also look at it as a way for him, like, as a coping mechanism, because maybe Canute realizes what the rumors about what his father plans to do. Canute's not dumb. He's pretty smart. He's just quiet. So maybe Canute has realized that when they get back to Gainsborough, there's a chance that he may have to fight his brother, and there's rumors that people want him dead. So maybe he's like, my father wouldn't do that because he loves me, so it's okay. He's like, it could be a coping mechanism, it could be a defense mechanism, but it could also refer just to his faith in general. Maybe Canute does not love his biological father. Maybe Canute views the king as awful, but that's why he's turned to religion, because he's like, I need a father figure that loves me no matter what. And this is my way of having it. My faith shows me that my God, my father, loves me. And so he's not forsaken me like my own biological father has. So it's a way for him to tie to faith. So there's 3 different ways you can view that scene. It could be all 3. It could be a combination of them. But what I like about it is that it connects to Thorfinn. To Thorfinn and his father, who has been like the metaphorical Jesus in the last episode. So that's interesting, because Thorfinn, it's like the one thing Canute, and it's interesting because Canute and Thorfinn have, their fathers are seemingly the opposite. They seem like they're the opposite, and their upbringing seem the opposite. But the fact that Canute and Thorfinn may both love their father is quite curious. I'm like, But he kind of squints his eyes at that. Like, Canute kind of squints his eyes at that line about every father loving his child. So part of me maybe thinks that Canute is doubting that his real father, his biological father, loves him. So he's so devout in his faith because it's a chance for him to get that love from another outlet. It's like, oh my gosh. But he just gets mad, and Ragnar's like, oh, your highness. And he just gets mad and storms off. And Ragnar's like, oh, wait. And Thorfinn's like, He's like, my father, huh? Because Thorfinn is very tied to his father. He's cleaning off his father's weapon as they talk about it. So that's interesting. So yeah, so we cut back to the army of the Danes, and God, the message. That's what the message said. And I love that the two English people are like, so you can leave now. The Danes, go fight them. Leave our place and quit eating us out of house and home, please. We've got to survive the winter somehow. He said they occupied a village at the head of the Severn River. And we received a request for reinforcements from a local lord. According to one of the villagers who survived, the enemy has 100 to 200 men, and it's Anne. That's how she is the big player in all this. What's interesting to note is, if we're talking about this nonlinear history here, that we have Anne, put Anne over here. So we have Anne, who, this is where things get kind of interesting in terms of like, she was wondering like, why am I being, like, what is the whole point of all this, right? So Anne, who had stolen and quote unquote sinned, she survives Askeladd's attack. Okay. And she makes it to the village. Just happened to make it to the village that Thorkell was at to spread their location. So yeah, so it's curious, right? Because if it's all a roundabout thing that Askeladd attacked the village for supplies and killed everyone except her. So if he hadn't killed everyone, if he hadn't slaughtered them all, then she may not have gone to the village. She might have still gone. A lot of other people could have gone, but the fact of the matter is we don't know, right? So Askeladd not only killing the village led to Anne giving away their information, but it also led to this entire conversation happening with the priest that is going to tie Thorfinn more to Canute. So it's all like the trajectory of everybody's actions are starting to come to light in all of this. But yeah, it's like Askeladd's actions are having repercussions. And it almost seems like when they're like, why are we being tested? And it's like, well, because you killed a whole village. And this is kind of karma. It's literally karma. It's literally, you killed a whole village, and now this is your comeuppance, right? Now Thorkell's going to find out where you're at, because if she had never made it to that village, they would still be spinning their wheels. They would have no clue where Askeladd was. But these actions, and then if you trace that back even further, Askeladd only went to that village because they went up into the mountain, because they made all these other decisions leading up to that moment. So it's like divine fate. It's like divine fate. They were going to meet Thorkell and fight him eventually. It's just all this other stuff happened along the way, right? So it's almost like a commentary on, them trying to escape fate, but it not working out, right? But that's not the only decisions that Askeladd makes, and we'll talk about those as we go, right? He wanted to ask you to come to Thorkell because of your military fame. He's like, what do you think? Well, nothing really. There aren't a lot of Danish units who would act alone there at this time of year. He's like, yeah, the Danes don't usually travel in the winter, so it's highly likely that this is Askeladd. He's like, they didn't go by sea, they're going to Gainsborough by land. They must have been snowed in and are stuck. He's like, I'm almost certain that it seems like, yes, he's like, it's Thorfinn and Canute. I love that he doesn't even acknowledge Askeladd or Bjorn. Doesn't even acknowledge them. He's like, it's Thorfinn and Canute's army. I'm like, oh my God. Yep, sure. Okay. And he's like, wake everyone up and get ready to march. And they're like, oh good, they're leaving. And then he's like, I need you two to make us lunch for 500 men to last 5 days. I basically need 2,500 bento boxes to go, please. It's literally what he's asking. And they're like, what? I freaking love it. And they got the bags into their eyes. It's great. And they just start crying. They're like, it's over. But he has the line in his hand where Thorfinn stabbed him, and his hands are all like cut up and bruised. Here we go. If we do this right, then we can enjoy this war for a long time. Yeah. So if we do this right, we can enjoy this war for a while. Okay. He's like, we'll just keep these battles going if we can get Canute. So that's the thing. So we don't know. What we don't know is that Thorkell is preparing to meet Askeladd in battle because of that, and tying back to that. So whether Askeladd doesn't quite realize it or not yet, he is going to be soon. But then we have the ear in them. And I just love that we have these, like, how many are there ear? And he says 50 or 100. He's like, they're extending their line to the east along the forest. I love that they're just out in the snow peeing. I just love that they're just staying out there. Guys got a lot of fluids they need to get out because they pee for quite a long time. It's like Tropic Thunder levels of peeing. They discovered us quickly. And Bjorn's like, did we make a mistake? And he says, I don't know. They found us. We can't change that. So yeah, so Askeladd by principle. I like that Bjorn is thinking, like, logically, did we make a mistake? Right? Bjorn's thinking logically. The Vikings are thinking that it's bad luck for Askeladd. And Askeladd, meanwhile, is very pragmatic and fundamentalist. He's very pragmatic and is just like, accept and move on. So Bjorn is trying to be like, well, where did we goof up at? How'd they find out where we were? Is there a mole in the system? Like, how is this? Did somebody leaked information? Like, how's this gotten out? The Vikings are all like, it's a bad omen. Askeladd's bad luck. And Askeladd is just thinking, well, they found us. We can't change it. We can sit here and worry about it, but that's not going to change the situation. And so then they go to the guys that I'm assuming are part of the Vikings, and he's like, we need the sleds being done. He's like, we've only finished 2. We just started on the 3rd one yesterday. He's like, well, then thanks. Finish them by tonight. And he's like, by tonight? He's like, well, abandon the ones we can't finish. He's like, that's impossible. There's only 2 carpenters. He's like, we can't work that fast. And he's like, well, the English army found us. They found us? Yeah. They came through the snow. They must really hate the Danes. And Askeladd would know because he hates the Danes. So, yeah. I love that he just takes those words and twists them. We have to hurry or we'll miss our chance to escape. He's like, so hurry up and finish it. And they're like, okay, we'll try our best. And so he tells Bjorn to prepare the men for battle, capture their commander, and find out how they found us. So yeah, so his whole thing is he's like, I need to know. He's like, we need to know what's going on. So he tells Bjorn to capture the English commander. He's like, we'll find out how they figured out we were here from him. We'll figure that out. But then after that, Bjorn's like, yeah, we got that. But then after that, he goes, now wait a minute, Bjorn. He's like, well, I'm thinking of it. He's like, one more thing. He's like, this is a good opportunity. Let's do what we discussed as well, which is kill Ragnar. He's like, it's a good chance to kill Ragnar. Because yeah, he's like, it's a battle. We're in the middle of battle with an enemy force. We just need to seclude, get Ragnar off by himself. We'll kill him and we'll say that he just died in the throes of battle. And that's it. That's all we have to do. And so meanwhile, we have all the guys there. They were having like an arm wrestling contest. Or are they having like a foot wrestling? No, they're having an arm wrestling contest. That one guy's just propped back. He's like, oh, they found us. Well, this is bad. Like, we'll be fine. The English are weak. And he says, no, that's not what I mean. He said, I was talking about Askeladd's luck. He's like, luck? He says, the heavy snowfall, and now this. This is the first time his plans have ever been ruined. And everybody's like, oh. So yeah, so the first time the plans have gone awry has been this go-bout. But I would argue that the Vikings think that it's bad luck, but I would argue that that maybe the reason things are going so crazy for Askeladd is because of his emotional investment. This is not just business for Askeladd anymore. This is personal. This is something tied to his family, to his legacy, to the people from his mother's family. It's not just a mercenary job anymore. Now he's like, no, this is a chance for me to like save my mother's people and keep the Danes or the English from bothering them. So he has a personal stake in it. And anytime you involve personal emotions, there's a good chance for error, right? We've seen that with Thorfinn time and time again. Every time he's dueled Askeladd, he's let his emotions get in the way, and cooler heads have prevailed. So Askeladd, even though he seems cool on the surface, he is investing a lot more emotionally. So there's a bigger chance that he's gonna make decisions that are maybe a bit more bold than he normally would, because he feels like he's a little bit desperate and needs to hurry up and try to get this mission done as soon as possible. So yeah, I feel like Askeladd's emotional investment is leading him astray a little bit, right? But anyway, so Ragnar talks about the tasty looking rabbit. Now, honestly, here's another thing too, is that Thorfinn and the rabbit, we're going to tie this over here, is the rabbit stew for dinner. Thorfinn just happens to walk by and happens to see Ragnar, right? And so the dinner date, as we will call it. But here's the thing. If Thorfinn had not come by and saw Ragnar, and Ragnar hadn't invited him for dinner, then when the troops showed up to take Ragnar away, would they have stayed would Canute have just been left by himself? I don't think so. I think that it's like important that Thorfinn is there, because otherwise I don't think they would have had the opportunity to take Ragnar away, because I don't think he would have left Canute alone. But he knows Thorfinn is competent and can protect Canute, so Ragnar leaves him with... So really, honestly, Thorfinn is kind of tied to Ragnar's death too, because if Thorfinn hadn't been there, Canute probably wouldn't have been left alone in the cabin, and Ragnar would not have gone and wouldn't have been killed. So in the most roundabout way, this act of kindness, this dinner date, ends up being... Ragnar's act of kindness ends up being his doom. Which is kind of crazy when you think about it, that's what caused it, right? That it all led to that. And he's like, are you going to eat it alone, or are you going to roast it? And he's like, well, it's none of your business. He's like, you should eat it with vegetables, you silly boy. He's like, I can eat my food however I want to. And he's like, come on. He's like, you're gonna need a stove, right? Get in here. Quit being dumb. Come over here and cook it. And he's like, fine. And he's like, I brought broad beans, cabbage, and rabbit. And he's like, rabbit? He's like, Thorfinn caught it. He's like, it would be good to add to the soup. And so, again, this is interesting that we have Canute with his hair up in the ponytail, looking like a damn woman, you know, and sitting there cooking and cleaning it, not looking very princely at all, which is curious. But Canute likes to cook. He likes to prepare and cook things. And so they have the wine, and they make the little soup with the bread, and Thorfinn's like, I don't drink. And he's like, what's this? And they're like, come on, go ahead and eat up. He's like, the ingredients are simple, but it tastes good. He's like, it's because of the rabbit. I've grown tired of salt-cured meat. Thank you. Like, Canute's so sweet to Thorfinn. It's so cute. Their little dinner date, and Thorfinn's like, oh, okay. But yeah. And he's like, what's wrong? Don't hold back. It's your rabbit. He's like, you're the one that caught it. You should definitely be eating. And then it's like, I love that the anime thing happens where whenever somebody eats something that's good, it's just like the hair stands on it for a hot second, and then he like dives in. It's like, oh. It's like, that's so cute. Mm-hmm. And Ragnar's like, oh, look at that. Isn't that funny? Catch us a deer next time. And so I love that he's like, they both sit there. He's like, I thought only royals did the eating. He's like, it's my hobby. I usually don't cook. So we find out from Canute that Canute, his hobby is cooking. That is his hobby that he's had since he was a young boy. Mm-hmm. And so he's like, no one knows about it except Ragnar. And you can't tell anyone either, okay? He's like, there's nothing wrong with it. Thorfinn's like, our family, everybody cooked at home. So he's like, I don't get what the big problem is. He's like, it's fine. But Canute's like, it's different. And then he says, a long time ago, I cooked some cod. And it turned out well. So I brought it to my father. And we see it there. We see like the cod, like it's on the tray with the soup and everything. It looks really cute. Looks great. 5-star course, 5-star meal. And there's little baby Canute. And he looks like he's about 6 years old. He looks like he's about Thorfinn's age from when this series started, right? It looks like he was. And Ragnar's sitting there kneeling beside him. And the moment you see the shadow pass over him, it's like, nope, this is not going to end well. And yeah, his dad just throws it away. His Highness didn't eat it. He was very angry. You're the child of a king. Don't act like a slave. I wasn't supposed to cook after that. A king's child doesn't need to know how to do things like this. So again, on the surface, that does seem like something very cruel, that your kid made you a meal and you were like, no, and it's like, you should not act like a slave. So, but here's the thing. Yes, Ragnar, because Ragnar's like a mother bear, and Ragnar is like, I love my child. Ragnar takes that as being something very cruel. Like, look what you did to this boy. Look what this cruel gesture. He tried to make you soup and cod, and you just treated him like he was a horrible person for doing this nice gesture to you. So, of course, Ragnar would think that it was the king being cruel. But you could look at it in another way. You could say that the king knows how talented Harold is and wants Canute to kind of be on par with him. And so he's telling his son, he's like, you are the king of the Danes. You could become king of the Danes. He's like, look, a king of the Danes, they can't know you cook. They'll think that you're acting like a slave. Like, that's our culture. So he's like, if you become king, they can't know that you're doing these domestic things. That's not what kings are supposed to be grand and order other people to do their bidding for them. So he's like, you'll look like a coward and you'll look weak if people find out you can do this. Right? So on the one hand, I feel like if the king hated his son, then he wouldn't have said the line, that's something a slave does. He wouldn't have made that line saying that a king's child doesn't need to know how to do things like that. Like, I feel like if he truly didn't want his son, if he wanted his son to die and didn't want his son to become king, he would have just slammed the food away and been like, oh, that's awful, and sent him away just to be an asshole. But he doesn't do that. It's like he tries to teach Canute a lesson with them. It's a messed up lesson, and I don't agree with it, but it seems like it's a lesson he's trying to teach him to become the future king. Like, you don't cook your own food as the king. Someone else does that for you. That's our culture. So that's interesting, right? That's very, very interesting. But yeah, Canute, he doesn't seem bothered by it. That's the thing. Canute doesn't seem bothered by it. He's just like, that's just the way things were. And the funny thing is that Thorfinn doesn't seem to view it as weakness. Thorfinn just views it as something normal that his family did. He doesn't see what the big issue is. But Canute tells him the story and gives him that perspective. And Thorfinn doesn't give a rebuttal. He doesn't say anything smart alecky. He just takes Canute in like, oh, okay. He's like, your dad was quite different than mine. Okay. And Ragnar's like, and Ragnar tries to coddle him. He says, at that time, His Highness must have been very busy. He's like, when the war's over, let's cook him some poultry and bring it to him. I'm sure that he'd be happy. So Ragnar, he coddles Canute. Because here's the thing, Canute seemed like he had accepted the fact that his father wasn't happy with him, and he accepted the fact that what he did was something he shouldn't have, and that he gets why his dad was mad. It seems like Canute's accepted it, right? Canute's been like, he's rationalized it, he's processed it, but Ragnar keeps wanting to coddle him and be like, oh, well, no, he didn't mean it. It's fine. You're okay. Right, sir? Right, sire? And so, he's like, we'll just make poultry for him and I'm sure he'd be happy. But it's like, Ragnar, you know that Canute knows that you're lying, that that's not going to be the case. And Canute, because he just slurps it, And he's like, what kind of poultry? Like, he accepts and acknowledges Ragnar and lets him go with it. I feel like Canute understands that his dad will not like the poultry, but he also realizes what Ragnar is trying to do for him in this moment, and so he's like, fine, I'll indulge you in this moment and what you're trying to tell me. Sure. He's like, what kind of poultry do we make? Right? What kind of poultry we're looking at? And he has like the glossiest lips. Our boy Canute has like the glossiest lips. He's like, I've never cooked poultry before. He's like, oh, we'll do chicken or duck. He's like, do you remember duck you ate during Yule? And he's like, oh, yes, that was delicious. I asked the cook for his secret. And I like that Thorfinn in this moment is just looking at him like, Like, okay, he made good use of the broth. And he's like, the broth. And that's when Thorfinn, he was like, at first when he says the broth, Thorfinn, I thought we were maybe having like a flashback, and maybe Thorfinn was like, was there some special tie to his family and their broth that they used? I was like, what are we doing with this? But no, it's that Thorfinn hears that someone's coming and puts a knife to his throat. And he's like, I have a message. And he's like, what's wrong? He's like, the enemy has found us, and a battle's begun in the woods to the east. He's like, they don't have a lot of men, but please be careful. And so he's like, well, what's going on? He's like, why? We've only been in this village for 10 days. How'd they find us? And he's like, how am I supposed to know? And then Ragnar's like, damn it. He's like, what is going on? So Ragnar's like, this is dumb. How'd they find us this quickly? What's happening? He doesn't like this. He's like, he knows Canute is in danger. He's like, we even killed all the villagers. So he's doing like Bjorn, and he's trying to run through and be like, what went wrong? And Canute, meanwhile, is sitting there looking away when he says we killed all the villagers. It almost feels like Canute probably thinks this might be like divine, like some divine karma happening, being like, yeah, we killed all these villagers, now we've been found. Like we've angered God and we tested him, and now he's punishing us. He's like, in any case, we're going to move once we defeat the English, so get ready. He's like, that's why I said first we'd headed back to Wales. He's like, and so Ragnar says we should have headed back to Wales. We should not have stayed here. And he's like, no, we're headed for Derby. And he's like, we still wants to keep walking through enemy lands in this situation. He's like, bring Askeladd here now. He's like, he's heading to the front line right now. But if you want to talk to him, you should go see him yourself. I'll show you the way. And his anger gets the better of him. Because here's the thing. If Ragnar had just said, no, I'll wait. We'll wait till after the battle, and then I'll have a stern talking to him. If he had waited until after the battle and stayed with Canute and Thorfinn, I mean, they couldn't have drug him out, right? That would have been too suspicious. So Askeladd just said, take advantage of the opportunity if it comes. If we have the opportunity to get at Ragnar by himself, let's go ahead and kill him. But if he had just stayed there with Canute and Thorfinn wouldn't have let him take him away against his will. So it's just fate. His anger gets the better of him. And he decides to go to give Askeladd a piece of his mind. And he's like, you men are just like your leader, unbelievable. And the moment we saw their backs and they're walking alone through the woods, I was like, Ragnar, you are dead. It's over. I was like, nope, it's over. You're dead. You don't have any manners. He's like, you can't even read his own luck. He can't even read his own luck. And he's a Norse warrior. I swear on my sword, I'm going to show him how foolish he is today. And he kind of does. It's like what a self-fulfilling prophecy. Even though Ragnar dies, he's like, oh, your plans about using Canute to become like, to gain this political place and power, it's not going to be that simple. So I love that I love this moment where Ragnar's like, I'll put him in his place. And he kind of does by the end of this, just not in the way we expected. And he's like, hey, why are the battles coming, the sound of battles from that way? Like, it took you long enough to figure it out. You're so slow. And then he realizes what's happening. And that God, that image of the tree and the shadows and just the divide between them, like visually, it's like that's such a good scene. Such a good moment. And he's like, oh, and he goes to draw a sword, and then he gets stabbed. Like, it goes up through him this way. So, like, you can't just heal that. Like, it went sideways through him. Like, he's done. Speared. And they were hiding in the snow. Oh. It's like, you bastards. And then they apologize and they said it's orders from Askeladd. He's like, well, damn it. And so he asks to see him. He's like, I need to tell him. He's like, fine. He's like, if Askeladd's gonna kill me, then he needs to know this about my prince before I die. And just the way that he wheezes, like just like that wheezing, oh my god. It's just like, like you can just feel that pain, and he knows he's gonna die. So he's like, I need to talk to him now. He's like, bring him here. I have something important to tell him. And the thing of it is, Askeladd didn't go far behind. So Ragnar does his last words to Askeladd. I find that interesting that Askeladd did not leave far behind, because I like to think that Askeladd may have realized that maybe, just maybe, Ragnar could have been a threat. He could have been able to fight. And so Askeladd, wanted to make sure that Ragnar did not leave that situation, but to make sure that his men were competent and did their job. And so I find that interesting that he stuck behind, thinking that there could be a chance something could have gone awry. Like, his luck's been pretty bad this last couple episodes, so maybe he thought he might as well stay there. He's like, it's related to His Highness the Prince. I need to talk to him directly. And he's like, hurry up. And that's when he's like, let's hear your dying wish. And Askeladd showing up. Yep. Oh, I love it. Shall we speak in private? So meanwhile, at the best date ever, Thorfinn and Canute are just sitting there. He's like, the cry stopped. The battle's over. I like that Thorfinn stayed by the door the entire time to make sure that no one else came near the house, and so he could hear the battle. And Canute, the classic line about the soup, the classic line whenever somebody's about to die is the food's getting cold. That's the classic line, right? It's happened in like 4 anime series I've watched where they've been like, the food got cold. And then we have this dizzying effect of the sky like just spiraling in front of Ragnar. You did a good job keeping that coward of a prince alive. Your death will cause him to grow even further. He's like, I will take over that job starting today. And Ragnar's like, you bastard. In place of you, who was killed by the English. Ragnar's like, you would. He's like, bitch, you would. So he says that Askeladd is going to take over watching Canute. Who's gonna eat meals with Canute, though? Is Thorfinn gonna have to eat meals? That would be really sweet if Thorfinn ended up making some meals with Canute now that Ragnar's gone. That'd be really sweet, because I don't foresee Askeladd making rabbit stew with Canute and like bonding with him at all. So I feel like maybe Thorfinn would like make a stew or something and like give it to him and be like, here, I don't know, eat it or something. Like some kind of bonding experience. Because Ragnar is kind of like a father to Canute as well. That's the other thing, is that whether Canute really realizes it or not, Ragnar is like a father to him. He loved him unconditionally, like he was his child. And it's like, it's like, swear to your God. Swear that you'll take over for me, and that you won't let any harm come to Canute. That you'll protect His Highness at whatever the cost. And Ragnar's like, fine. Or Askeladd's like, fine. I'll do that. He's like, I will protect His Highness Canute at whatever the cost, and ensure that Ragnar the warrior did not die in vain. The fact that he calls Ragnar a warrior is interesting. Where he's like, I'll make sure Ragnar the warrior didn't die in vain. Are you satisfied? And he's like, it fills me with regret to leave His Highness with you. Like, he's like, no, I'm not satisfied at all. He's like, well, you should hurry. You've lost a lot of blood. He's like, I'm not going anywhere. And so then we have him saying, before you reach Gainsborough, you need to know some things. He's like, you need to prepare yourself. Oh my God, I love this scene. The court in Jelling are fighting over who will be the next king of Denmark. And it's split into two factions. One of the factions picked His Highness Canute as their leader. And the other picked Canute's brother, Harold, who looks like a much more menacing man. Looks a little bit more like his dad, has like the hair that's a little curly like his dad, even though it's reddish. So Harold. So yeah, so the factions, so there's two factions that want the king. There's a faction that it's either Canute or Harold as king. And the court is split on who should get that right. They don't care about what either of them wants. So the court's like, we don't care what either person wants. Maybe Harold doesn't want to be king. Maybe Canute doesn't. They're like, we don't care. We need a king, and it's going to be one of you. He says it's a power struggle amongst those traitors. His Highness the King feared that the kingdom of Denmark would be split. So yeah, here's the thing. So he's saying in this moment, he's like the court, he's like, they're all just a bunch of traitors. They don't care about the royal family. They don't care about Denmark. They just care about their own personal agendas. So they just want to have these two duke it out to the death to see who's going to be king. And Sweyn was worried that Denmark would be split in half over this, that they would fight. And so his heart was probably already decided. But again, we don't know that for sure, right? Ragnar is just guessing. Ragnar doesn't say he knows his heart was decided or that the king told him any of this. He just, I mean, it would make sense the king would be worried about the country being split. It would make sense, right? That would make sense that he would be worried about that. But we don't hear him say the king told me that he'd rather have Harold. Didn't say that. He's just spilling the wine in that moment. He decided to kill one of the princes. And Askeladd's like, wait, what? Decide to kill the prince? Excuse me? He's like, the reason that the king took the prince to battlefield with him was to have the prince die in battle. And Askeladd's like, are you friggin' serious? He's like, what? He's like, be careful. Canute's real enemy is King Sweyn. Is now his father, King Sweyn, himself. That's the crazy thing about all this, is that Askeladd's plans, in the most crazy karma, his plans just had a giant kink put into them, because he thought he was just going to walk into town, walk into Gainsborough with Canute and be like, here's the crown prince, did my job, gotta get a spot on that court, right? Now I got all this political stuff going on, so now I can help my friends in Wales out, so we're all hunky-dory, right? He thought he had everything planned. But Ragnar's just been like, oh no, Harold could still become king. They could still plot and kill Canute, and Harold could become king. Which is not what Askeladd needs at all, because one, Harold could decide to kill Askeladd, he could decide to go to Wales, still trash their kingdom, do all this, ignore the treaty that Canute put into practice, and then Askeladd will not have a place in the court and could be killed. So yeah, it's a big old kink in the plan, this information from Ragnar. And Ragnar's like, I wanted to get the prince back. I feel like Ragnar thought he could protect Canute no matter what. He's like, I can get Canute out of here. I can do whatever needs to be done. We can make this work. We'll get him out somehow. It'll be okay. But now that he's dying, he's like, oh, hope you're smart. Hope you can navigate the court and figure all this political mumbo jumbo up, because now you're in charge. You just swore. He's like, I made you swear you would protect Canute before I told you all this. Have fun! Because, yeah, Harold could be a big threat to all of that. And I wonder, too, if one of the reasons that Canute was like, I don't know. I feel like Canute, one of the reasons he went on the battlefield is because he knows all this. I feel like Canute understands that his father doesn't like him or wants him dead. Again, And so I'm curious to know Canute's relationship with Harold. I imagine it's not great. I imagine it's not very good. He's like, go into exile. It's the only way now. And he coughs up all that blood. In Gainsborough, my brother will make preparations for you. So Ragnar has a brother in Gainsborough, and he tells Askeladd, he's like, if you get to Gainsborough, Ragnar's brother will help you go into exile. He's like, at this point, the only way to save Canute is to like make him go into exile. My brother will help you guys get out of the country. You can go away. It'll all be good. Which is not what Askeladd's plan has been at all. That going into exile is the opposite of Askeladd's plan. He's like, I was planning to make Canute the king, get on the court, make all these changes. Going into exile is not on the list of things to do. And he's like, ugh. And him just like plopped in the snow like that. He's like, what's going on? He's like, you should have told me earlier so I could start planning around it. And Ragnar says, please let me. And the fact that he's like going through his like the blood slush of the snow to grab his sword. It's like, please let me have one last look at His Highness. To say goodbye. And Askeladd's like, no. I'm like, Askeladd's just being so Askeladd, but also at the same time, he's like, you're not going to make it to him. You're about to die. You're not going to make it back to Canute. And that will ruin our plans. God, that's so sad. And then he says the whole thing with the poultry. He's like, once this war's over, we'll make some poultry for His Highness. I'm sure he'd be happy. And his last vision is of baby Canute. Is of little kid Canute in the grass in the meadows. That's his like last vision of him. Let's cook poultry together. As like the twilight comes and it's becoming evening. And then he dies. And Askeladd we don't see his face. Oh, that's such a good episode. So good. So let's put a big old hitch in the plan. Because, so now what are you going to do, Askeladd? Your whole mission of just... Because it seems like he had planned that maybe he would grab Canute in the middle of battle and go abandon everybody else and just run off. But now it's like, is that going to happen? Can that happen anymore? I don't know. Because now it's like, even if he goes to Gainsborough, he's not guaranteed to get a spot on the council. He's not even guaranteed for Canute to make it. Harold could be there and they could kill Canute. Or it's going to lead to a big civil war. So in any case, his chances now of getting what he wants with Wales is like less than 50-50. I mean, it's 50-50 on the offset of just will Canute or Harold become king. But now there's all these other factors that it's like even less likely. So Askeladd's like, well, damn it. What do we do now? So that's so interesting. But but just the idea in all of this that all these little actions from the last several episodes are all adding up. That the actions of the last episode of Anne getting away, of all the decisions made to kill the village of everything, that's all had repercussions. And it's led to some good things, like Thorfinn and Canute having these moments together, like in this episode. But then it's also led to Ragnar dying and all these other situations. So it's so interesting to see how these events tie to one another. But I'm still wondering if the king actually does like Canute, maybe more than Harold. We don't know anything about Harold. We don't know if the king likes Harold. We don't know that or not. We just know half the kingdom wants Harold to be king and half of them want Canute. So interesting. I feel like Canute represents the new Christian wave that can go through Denmark, and Harold maybe represents like the old style of Denmark. I don't know. We don't know anything about Harold. So But that's interesting. So I feel bad for Canute now, because if Ragnar is dead, then Canute's all by himself. And so the only person he could possibly connect with is Thorfinn. So that's the only person he can connect with now. I just need Thorfinn to make him some soup. Some get along soup. That's all I need Thorfinn to do, but I don't know if we're going to get that or not. I don't know. So we'll see, huh? So, but this was a really good episode. I like this a lot. And it's setting up that Thorkell and them are getting closer. I don't know. It's going to be interesting. We're not going to be to the end of Act 2 until like episode 18 or so. So that's going to be fun to see what all happens between now and then. But R.I.P. Ragnar. I'm sad that he's dead. I really am. I knew he was going to die this season. It just seemed like it was going to happen, but I thought it was going to be like in the 20s before it got to that point. Nope. We brought it up like 2 episodes ago, and now we're doing it. So it's like Vinland Saga does not wait around. It does not mess around. So in any case, I hope y'all have a wonderful week. Please stay safe, take care, and yeah, I'll be back very soon with more Vinland Saga. Bye.